Well, good evening. No, there's nothing wrong with your video. I'm actually in total darkness. It is really, really dark where I am. Why am I in the dark? Well, last week we talked about Noah and his family and what it must be like to have been on that ark for a whole year. That would not have been fun. That would have been a pretty miserable experience. Well, tonight we're going to talk about someone else who was also cooped up, so to speak, who had it probably, in my opinion, worse than Noah and his family. And I'm talking about Jonah. Jonah, for 3 days and 3 nights, he was stuck in the belly of a fish. That's a great story for kids. We all learn it very early on. But how often do we stop to think about what would it really be like to be in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights? That's got to be rough. That's got to be gross. It's got to be dark. It's got to be spooky. It's got to be very problematic. We're going to get into that more. Let's go ahead and start by reading in Jonah chapter 1. All right, so we know the setup for the story. God gives Jonah a mission, and he says, go to Nineveh, prophesy against them. And Jonah, he doesn't want to do that. He wants nothing to do with Nineveh or the Ninevites, and so he gets on a boat, he goes the other way. He tries to hide, he tries to run from God, and it doesn't work. A storm comes along, all the people fear for their life on that boat. And so we pick up in verse 9 of chapter 1. It says, and he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And the men were exceedingly afraid, and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, Pick me up, and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. The thing about the story of Jonah is that we learn it a little bit backwards. The lesson we learn as kids is, number one, you cannot hide from God. Even though Jonah is trying to escape, he can't escape. God knows where he is. He knows where he's in the boat. He's hiding underneath there. He knows where he is at all times. You cannot hide from God. And so that's the first thing we learn as kids. And then we sort of shift over and we focus on the fish swallowing him and how he's there for 3 days and 3 nights. But we sort of rush through the fact that they threw him overboard and why they threw him overboard. You see, nobody knew that great fish was coming. Nobody knew a fish was appointed by God to come and swallow him. What they did know is that they are all in trouble if they don't do something, because they're being punished for Jonah's actions. And Jonah says, throw me overboard. And they don't do that at first. They try to row back to dry land first, but eventually they have to do it. They have to throw him overboard. This is a death sentence. By throwing him overboard, what they think they're doing is killing him. He's going to drown. That's the reason they throw him over. They're throwing him over to drown. They are killing him because they think that's what it takes to appease God for Jonah's disobedience. And Jonah, he even goes along with it. He thinks, I have to die for this. I've disobeyed God. I have to die. Can you imagine being in that situation? being Jonah, and you come to the realization that the reason all of this is happening around you, the reason for this storm, is because of what you did. And now, because of what you did, you've got two options. And only two options. Number one, stay there, do nothing, and everyone dies. Number two, you can die yourself and save the rest of them. If you're Jonah, the only outcome is death. That's all that's going to happen. If you're Jonah, the whole point is for you to die. And can you imagine being one of the people on the boat? You have to kill this guy. If you and the rest of the people on board are going to live, then you have to go ahead and throw this guy overboard and let him drown. Verse 14 says, "Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." They're saying, God, we're going to throw this guy overboard. Don't hold it against us. We're about to kill this guy. Don't hold it against us, because this is what you want. And if it's what you want, we're going to do it. But don't charge us with murder. Don't hold it against us. We don't want to kill the guy. But if that's what you want us to do, then okay. If that's what it's going to take, okay. And then verse 15, "So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging." Death is the punishment for disobeying God. Jonah deserved to drown in the sea. But then comes the fish. Verse 17, "And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." Now, there's two things that we want to talk about with this fish. And number one is, what would it have been like to be inside the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights? As a kid, I had seen the old Pinocchio cartoon. Maybe you've seen that as well. And if you have, then you might remember when Geppetto gets swallowed by the whale, and then Pinocchio goes after him to rescue him. Well, the whale that swallows Geppetto, he swallowed the entire ship. And so now Geppetto is living on his boat inside the whale. And the result of watching that is that that's kind of how I imagined Jonah, right? Jonah gets swallowed by it, and now he's inside, and he's sitting there on a little island of whatever it is, of stuff, and maybe he can build a fire, and he walks around and all of that. Basically, it's like being in a big cavern, like being in this giant cave. But is that quite right? Is that really what it would be like, living in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights? You see, it's an animal. It has the anatomy of an animal. See, there's a miracle that occurs here. It is a miracle that he even survived, because under normal circumstances, that would not happen, right? So what's it like in there? Well, let's go back to the beginning. It would be dark. It would be so dark. It's not just dark, it is pitch black in there. Jonah can't see a thing. He doesn't even have this light like I've got right here. At least I can light it up a little bit so that you can see my face. He doesn't have that. It is pitch black, and it's got to be so gross in there. You're all slimy and nasty and disgusting. You're in those fish guts. Can you move? Can you move around in there? Probably not. You're in the guts. There's not a whole lot of room to move. In fact, Jonah may have felt like he was going to be crushed. You can't walk. You can't sit up. You're just laying there. And what's it smell like in there? What is the stench like in there? Did Jonah throw up because it smelled so bad? It's got to be so nasty. And what did it feel like when the fish was swimming around? Was it doing rolls? Was it going up and then diving back down? As I said, this is a miracle, because there are two things that normally wouldn't take place if you were swallowed by a fish or by a whale. Number one, there's no oxygen in there. You'd pass out pretty quickly. You can't breathe. And number two, you're in the guts, you're in the stomach. There's stomach acid. It starts eating away at your flesh. It starts digesting you. Obviously, that didn't happen with Jonah, but how much oxygen was in there? Did Jonah feel like he couldn't really breathe very well? And did he feel that stomach acid? Was it touching his skin? Did it kind of sting? I mean, we don't know, but it's got to be a terrible situation. Go ahead and pause this video and discuss and talk about what you think it would have been like for Jonah to be there inside the stomach, and get creative, get imaginative. Really think about all the details of what it would be like to be stuck inside the stomach of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so last week we talked about Noah and his family being on the ark for a full year, and we talked about how that wouldn't have been a very fun thing. That would be pretty miserable. And this week we're talking about Jonah being in the stomach of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Also, quite miserable. So, you're going to pause this video again, and we'll play a real quick game with the people that are with you. Let's play Would You Rather. Would you rather be in Noah's situation, stuck on the ark for a full year, not seeing the sun, not feeling the air on your face, putting your foot on dry ground, none of that for a full year? Or would you rather be Jonah? Jonah is in a much worse situation. It's by far worse. It's just gross. But it only lasts for 3 days, 3 nights, and then it's over. One situation is worse, but shorter. And the other situation's not quite as bad, but much longer. If you had to pick one, which is it? Go ahead and pause this video now and discuss that. All right, so you think you have it bad now with all this social distancing and the stay-at-home orders, and oh man, I can't be with my friends, I can't go to the places I want to go. Imagine being in this situation. That's the first point that we want to make with this story. It's the same as last week. Whether it's Noah in the ark or Jonah inside the fish, put things in perspective. Put things in perspective and think about the fact that even though these aren't our ideal times, it's not the situation that we want to be in. It could be a whole lot worse. Things could always get way, way worse. The reality is we've got it pretty good. There's a tendency to get short-sighted and hone in on our troubles for the moment. We can get tunnel vision, and we only see the problems that are right in front of us. But we forget about the blessings that are all around us. We can't see the bigger picture. We can't see the good things that are coming out of it because we're so focused on the bad things. But this brings us to point number 2 about this story. You see, we often see the fish as being punishment for Jonah's sins. He disobeyed God, and his punishment is to be inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Except, that's not completely right, is it? Being in there could certainly feel like a punishment. But remember, the sailors threw him overboard thinking they were killing him. Jonah told them, "You got to throw me overboard." Why? Because he thought that was the punishment, death. He needed to drown in the sea. The punishment is death. The fish actually saved him from death. The fish in this story is his salvation. Rather than letting Jonah drown in the sea, God sends a fish to pluck him out of the sea and not let him die. Jonah is swallowed by the fish, and then comes chapter 2. Let's read all of chapter 2. It says, "Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight. Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord." And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon dry land. Jonah doesn't see this fish as being punishment. Actually, he thought he was going to die in the sea. He says, the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. He says, the waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. This is bad. He's drowning. He's dying. He is finished. But then God saves him. God sends this fish, and Jonah doesn't die. What we often read as punishment, Jonah sees as salvation. What we often read as being a terrible situation, Jonah is praying his thanksgivings. We would say, oh, that'd be awful to be in there. That would be terrible to be in there. That's nasty. What a horrific thing to endure. And Jonah's saying, hey, I'll take it. I'm happy for it. Because the alternative is I die. The alternative is it's all over. When we think of Noah and the ark, that would not have been very fun. But what's the alternative? They die, like everyone else. What can often seem like punishment and bad circumstances and hardships and troubles and difficulties often leads to something much better for us. And it's kind of the idea that you can't know pleasure unless you first know pain. Success is so often dependent upon failure. It takes the bad in order for us to really know and really experience the good. Rachel and I were sitting on the porch the other night having a deep conversation about if you had a time machine and could go back in time anywhere you want, where would you go and what would you see? And we got into the discussion about changing events. If you could prevent something terrible from happening, would you? And our first impulse may be to say, yeah, I would. I want to fix things. I want to save lives. I want to stop atrocities from happening. But if you think about it, many of those bad things led to good things. The bad things, all those terrible events in our history, they led people to react against them in a good way. And if there wasn't the catalyst of the bad, then you never would have gotten the good. Through this entire situation that we're living in right now, we are still incredibly blessed. And we should always recognize those blessings and count our blessings and thank God for those blessings. But we should also recognize the difficulties and the hardships, recognize the pain and the problems, but not dwell on that, not hang on to it, not stop there with the situation in front of us and be short-sighted, but see what can come out of it. See how God is working in it. Don't see the fish coming our way and say, well, this is bad. This is bad. See the fish coming our way and say, God's at work. God is saving me. God is doing something amazing. I hope all of you have a great rest of your week. I hope you will have a godly perspective through all of this. When you see the great fish out there, don't say, oh no. Say, I see God at work. Something good will come out of this. See you all again on Sunday. Have a great night. Bye.